Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Ranching 101. We are excited that you have joined us and that we are joined by Brant Self today. And so before we get into the program today, we want to thank our sponsor, Lone Star Ag, for their support of Ranching 101. And at this time, we have a brief video from them.
My name's Tony Ballinger, and me and my family own and operate Crossbeat Cattle Company. We'd be considered a first-generation ranching operation. You know, we kind of started from scratch and kind of built up over the years. Just me and my son, Carson. You know, the guys there at Lone Star, they do a good job of building a good relationship. It's more like dealing with a partner than it is a bank. And I think that's really important in the ag business.
We thank Lone Star Ag Credit for their support. We would not be able to do all the things we do without them. Before we begin, I just want to remind you all of a few upcoming events. Our summer meeting is this June 9th through the 10th in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and registration is currently open. And for more details, you can go to tscra.org events and see how to register and what events and meetings will be going on at that summer meeting. Also, would like to remind you all that May 17th will be the May Ranching 101, and we will be talking about Meet the Meat carcass overview. And so we are excited to have that as well. You can go to tscra.org for more information or email us at education@tscra.com. So at this time, I want to introduce this month's speaker, Brant Self. Brant works for Clifton Larson Allen, LLP, as the principal Texas agribusiness leader. Growing up in a small North Texas town, Brant understands the issues facing the industry, and he strives to help his clients improve their operations. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, we encourage you to send them through the chat or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will get around to those at the end of the session. But other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Brant. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tyler. Happy to be here. Let me get this set up real quick. All right, we're good to go. So happy to be here today. I was telling Tyler this a little bit earlier when we were getting ready to give me a little grace today. When I told her I would do this a few months ago, I didn't realize that this was going to be the day after my tax deadline. So my fastball is income tax, but obviously with my role here at CLA and kind of how working with clients on their income tax compliance, obviously a big topic conversation we're going through planning every year is estate and succession planning. So excited to share a little bit of knowledge with you guys here today and get into that. So first, just a little bit of a disclaimer. So obviously I am a CPA, but I'm not necessarily your CPA, and I'm also not a lawyer. So there's going to be a lot of these issues that we talk through today that it's really important to have a team. You know, there's a team approach to estate and succession planning. You need a CPA, someone that's thinking about the tax implications, but you also definitely need an attorney involved and a good estate attorney involved that knows the ins and outs of not only estate planning, but also the ag specific pieces of this as well. So again, so just it's a team approach. So a little bit more about me. I'll share my contact info a little bit later, but like Tyler said, I didn't grow up on a ranch by any stretch. We had about 40 acres or so, and grew up riding horses, and grew up calf roping all through college, and I still do it today when I can. But with 3 small children, that is few and far between, it seems, anymore. But really have a passion around agribusiness and just the clients that I get to work with. I had a choice of going to Tarleton, trying to do the rodeo thing out of college, and out of high school, chose to go to University of North Texas and get my accounting degree, and started with a small firm in Dallas, as far away from agriculture as you could get. And a few years into my career, the firm I was with was acquired by CLA, and I've been a part of CLA ever since. And it's been a really cool for me to kind of circle back to the ag side of things, and so get to do kind of what I went to school to learn, and to be a CPA and an income tax compliance and consultant for clients, but also to work with clients like yourselves on a day-to-day basis. So really enjoy that. So there's the dream that we can kind of get into every nuance of gifting, estate, succession planning, all those things today. But the reality is we've got about 45 minutes. And so there's no way we could possibly talk about everything there is to talk about here. So I'm sure you guys have questions. Feel free to ask questions. We'll get through the questions that we can. But if we don't get your question answered today, I'll work with Tyler and we'll make sure and see if we can't help you guys with an answer too. But just know that every family is different. Every situation is different. And so many times the default answer is it depends, because it really does. There's so many factors that can affect this. And if anybody comes and tells you there's the silver bullet approach or one way to do anything, probably that's not accurate. So we'll get into this today, but the current gift and estate tax law as it's set to this is through 2026. So upon death, up to 12 million will pass exempt from federal estate tax. So a married couple can pass $24 million. And so a lot of you on this presentation might be thinking, well, Brant, that's not something I ever have to worry about, because that's something that I don't feel like I have to worry about right now. But stay tuned, because you might really need to consider this, even if you are well below those limits. During the lifetime, you may give up to 12 million of your assets, 24 million if married, exempt from federal gift tax, which you would reduce the amount that you can give at death. So the gift tax system and the estate tax system, they are unified. And so there's one unified exemption for both. And so for estates or gifts in excess of the exemption, the maximum tax rate is 40%. So, and it's not graduated, it's just a straight 40%. So that can be very onerous for those folks that do fall into these rules. A little bit on the annual gift tax exclusion. Many of you may have already heard about this or already practicing this in your current year-to-year tax planning, and I think that's a great thing to do. But it's the annual gift tax exclusion. So that's currently $16,000. That's indexed for inflation every year. And so you can give, each person can give to as many individuals as the donor wishes without eating into that unified exclusion of 12.6. So if you have a married couple, each of the spouses could give up to $16,000 to each kid, each grandkid, each neighbor, every church member, or whatever your situation is, without getting into that gift tax exclusion. So it can be a great tool to have in the tool belt when you start thinking about gift and estate planning. There are state inheritance and estate taxes that deserve special attention. So you see a number of states listed here. Luckily, Texas is not one of those that has state inheritance or estate taxes, so not something we have to worry about here, but it's something to consider if you have family members elsewhere. So like I said earlier, so this is set to sunset in 2026. So there is definitely a clock that's ticking down right now. There's a potential use it or lose it opportunity here as well. And again, we're not going to get into a lot of the what might happen, but what we do know will happen right now is this is set to sunset in 2026. And what that means is that the temporary doubling of the exemption is set to expire January 1st of 2026. So it's going to revert back to revert back toward the 2017 levels. And this was about $6 million per person. So a $12 million per married couple. And so that's what it's set to revert back. But of course, changes in law, legislation can obviously change that. And it could be something lower, or it could stay right where we're at. We just don't know what's going to happen. So there are elections in 2022 and 2024. And so any law can change at any time. We've seen that time and time again these last few years that we've been dealing with the pandemic and the CARES Act and everything that's kind of come down the pipe. Things can change. Build Back Better didn't pass as it was written. It was knocked down, but some other version might pass. There's the new budget proposal kind of detailing out how they're going to pay for everything. There's some not good things in that as well. But again, it's just a proposal. Only Congress can write laws and things. So there's a long ways from a proposal to become a law. So I say that just to say, take everything with a grain of salt that you're reading about where things might go, because there's nobody that has a crystal ball and knows where we're going to end up. But now is the time to act. There's good things come out of being proactive and planning, and not just sticking your head in the sand and waiting for things to happen, but trying to take a more direct approach to it. So the first huge topic is portability. This election is crucial, and so what this basically means is a surviving spouse can make a portability election to port over any unused federal estate tax. We'll go through an example here in the next slide or two to kind of go through this, but the election must be made after the death of the first spouse. And we've seen it here at CLA with some clients that we've inherited of this portability election not being made because their CPA attorney, whoever advised them, there was no estate. They weren't in an estate tax situation. So no estate tax was required to be filed on the death of the first spouse, and lost out on a lot of exemption amount that could have been used, and then ended up being in an adverse position with the death of the second spouse, where a lot more was being taxed at 40% than it should have been, or that it needed to be if this election was made. So it's not automatic. It's only available since 2011. So at one time it was kind of a use it or lose it. You know, if you died and you hadn't used all your exemption, it was just gone forever. And then in 2011, this portability election came into play. And so this could be a multi-million-dollar mistake if it's not elected. So there are situations where we've also seen where the surviving spouse declines to elect that because for whatever reason, they don't want to go through the trouble of filing a return, or there's all kinds of reasons we hear. But, you know, as advisors, you know, we should be getting that in writing because this could have a huge impact on that in the future. Example of portability election is not made. So I will just walk through this example if it's not, and then if it is. So Jed and Jane are farmers with a net worth of 11 million and one son who also farms. So Jed dies in 2022 with all assets jointly owned. So they automatically pass to Jane just by operational law, right? That's pretty simple. Jane's CPA and lawyers say there's nothing to do. There's no state tax due because you know, clearly they're not over the estate tax limit. And so because we have the marital deduction in play, which says, you know, when he dies and gives everything passes over to Jane, there's a marital deduction that happens, and so there's no estate tax. Jane dies in 2026, and this is after the sunset of the $12 million per spouse exemption goes away. And so now the son owes $2 million in estate taxes. So basically the math works out to here, 11 million less 6 is 5 million, and then multiply that by your 40% estate tax rate. On the other hand, if the portability election is made, so it's the same facts occur, but the Jane CPA and lawyer help her file a Form 706 to elect portability of Jed's $12.6 million exemption amount. And there's all sorts of ways that when you file that first to die estate tax return, there's some shortcuts that can be had here, as it kind of talks about here. But basically, Jane dies in 2026 when the estate exemption is sunset to 6. Jane's available exemption is 18.06 million. So she gets Jed's original 12 million because that was ported over, and then her $6 million. So she still has that $18 million exemption. And so now son owes $0 in estate tax. So that's a $2 million swing just by making a simple election and filing that estate tax return on the death of the first spouse. So you can see how this could really add up in a hurry if you have a family in a situation like this. So portability timing and lessons. So be aware the Form 706 is due 9 months from date of death, and it can be extended with Form 4768 for another 6 months. So that's the default. There is a final deadline, 2 years from the date of death. There's a revenue procedure that you can kind of fall under, but it's if it's been longer than 2 years, portability is no longer available. So kind of some bolded points here. So if your spouse died within the last 2 years, file a 706 and elect portability. If one of your parents died within the last 2 years, help the surviving spouse file a Form 706. If you know someone's spouse who died in the last 2 years, tell them about this. Make sure that they're aware of this, because you never know, you know, how much money people have, and it's not something that a lot of people, especially in the ag industry, kind of walk around sharing with folks. So, you know, but when you take into account the land and the high values of land, you never know who might actually fall into this. So portability is a thing that everyone should be considering in their estate planning. So basically, the portability cannot collect and hold, but you can collect it and use it. And so basically, this is just saying, just jump to the example. So husband and wife worth 20 million, wife one dies in 22, husband collects the 12.06 million of unused exemption. The husband gifts that 12 million worth of farm assets to the children using wife one's unused exemption amount. He marries wife two, who then dies after 2026. So he then collects wife's $6 million unused exemption amount. So there's just planning in all of this. And so it's something to just to take in consideration as we kind of go forward through this presentation. So we could, this is a slide with a lot of information on it where we could go through and get into all the nuanced details of all this stuff, but we just don't have the time. We've done presentations on this as a firm that have been, 4 or 6 hours. We've done stuff with the Farm Journal Legacy Project and other things. And so Paul Nefer is a principal here at CLA, and he's well versed in this area, and he's done a lot of presentations all over the country on this and stuff. You can get so far down in the weeds, and there's so many planning opportunities here, but just some kind of bulleted points of how else to use it or lose it. And so gifts to children or irrevocable trust for their benefit. So that's one easy way to get things out of a taxable estate, is to make those gifts to children. You have all CPAs, we love acronyms. So you have IDGITs, GRATs, and SLATs. And so intentionally defective grantor trust, guaranteed residual annuity trust, and SLAT, spousal limitation annual trust or something. I can't remember I'm drawing a blank on there too. And then you also have bypass trust. And so there's also some planning around installment sales to irrevocable trust. Valuation discounts on equity interests can be a huge opportunity for transition and succession planning, because you can take lack of marketability discounts and other things to depress the value when you're making those gifts and things. So just lots of things to plan around here. Some common mistakes. We hear this all the time. I hear this from my current client base. Excuse me. There's a client that I'm thinking of right now that I've been talking to the two of them for years about doing something from the estate planning perspective, and they haven't done it. Well, now now's the time to start making some decisions, and you're limited in the decisions you can make if it's kind of have to make it now. And so there's planning, and that's taking a proactive approach. And there's reactive, which there's only so much that can be done when you're in a reactionary position, because you're just left with the situation that you have in front of you and making the best decisions you can with the circumstances that you have in front of you. But with some planning and looking ahead on this stuff, there's a lot of different levers that can be pulled. So so taxes are probably not your biggest problem. Family farms are destroyed more often by feuding families than by taxes. So I'm sure many of you on this call know that to be true, whether you've seen it from a neighbor, maybe you've experienced it within your own family or something like that. But part of estate succession planning, all these things, is just trying to preserve the family harmony, right? And so the biggest way to blow that up is to do nothing and just let the kids fight it out upon death, right? And so it's just something to keep in mind. Of one of the main goals through all of this is to preserve that family harmony. Who knows what will happen after 2025? So the estate tax exemption refers to half this in 2026, and anything could happen between now and then. Like we said, laws can change anytime. And so are you worth more than 6 million or 12 million for a married couple? If so, this is the time to act, is definitely now. Even if you're not quite at those levels yet, do you have land that's appreciated in value that you would be if you sold it? You also may have, this is kind of my point here. You may have false sense of security that your total assets are under the estate tax threshold, but what's your farm ground or your ranch land really worth? I mean, we've all seen the land pricing going up and up and up, housing, everything else. I mean, I'm a city boy right now. I'll be honest, that's what my family calls me anyways. But I live in town. Our house has more than doubled in value in the 8 years that we've lived there. So, I mean, and that's in town, that's not farmland. And some of these farmland stories that I've heard of what people bought it for versus what they could sell it for today are astronomical. And so what are your neighbors selling for? If you've had a neighbor sell, that's probably going to give you a pretty good indication of what your land's worth. So you may have a lurking tax problem now or as soon as 2026. The other thing is to consider is life insurance proceeds count when the taxable estate. Will the kids sell? What's your basis? Lifetime gifts remove the appreciating assets from the donor's estate, resulting in estate tax savings. So, but the biggest difference in understanding the difference in lifetime gifts and inherited assets is the basis. So for lifetime gifts, you get a carryover basis. So the recipient receives your low basis in your land, but it gets it out of your estate. So there's a good and a bad there, right? But if it's left upon death, you get a step up in basis. So the recipient's base is equal to fair market value on the date of death. Sorry, guys. So that could be a huge difference there. I was working with a client recently, and him and his I think his brothers, they inherited some land. It wasn't farmland or just land, undeveloped land up in another state, and it was gifted to them right before granddad's death, and so they got a carryover basis. So his gain that he picked up, we had to pick up on his tax return when they decided to sell it, was a lot larger than it would have been if it would have been left left to them through an uninherited basis. So it can be huge implications there. So just something to consider. Lifetime gifting may not be advisable if there may be a future sale. So if you are one that's structured this in a way that, one of my colleagues over in our Dallas office, their family has some land down in South Texas, and his dad has basically structured it in a way that the land can't be sold for 99 years or something after his grandson reaches a certain age or something like that. I mean, it's meant to be in the land for a long time. So in that situation, there's not going to be a future sale. And so how you plan and what planning actions that you take can be impactful in that. But if there may be a future sale, then that's something to definitely consider, because basis is definitely going to be a big factor in that. So careful analysis of the estate taxes versus the capital gains tax is necessary before gifting. And so again, so many rabbit holes we could dive down into here. The goal is obviously to be as rich as possible on the day you die without going over the limit of the exemption. And so that's kind of the ideal scenario. So on the day of your death, you're right below, from a value of your estate, right below that 12.06 million. You've already passed things along through gifting to grandkids, kids, whatever it may be. But if you're over that 12.06 million, there is an estate tax that comes into play. And again, that's, it's kind of a good problem to have, so to speak, but at the same time, if there are planning opportunities that can be taken, let's take. How's your ground title? So, this slide's all about maximizing the step up. So step up in basis and fair market value at the date of death is very powerful. So many farms are owned by half by the husband or his trust, and half by the wife or her trust, and that limits the step up in basis for the whole farm at the second death. So it's time to re-examine titling. So this used to be a very common practice, and you have an A and a B trust may have trapped an interest in ground in the first deceased spouse credit shelter trust. So again, this is not something you set it and forget it. This is something you should be reevaluating every 3 to 5 years, something like that, to make sure how your estate plan is set up is still the right way that it should be set up with the current facts and circumstances. If still living, adjust the estate plan to avoid forcing a credit shelter trust at the first death if assets are under the exemption. So again, it's all the nuanced stuff we get into. It's like even the titling of the assets, like you have to get down into the granular times to figure out what are the true implications of what's going to happen. And so the only way you do this is by taking a hard look at this and taking the time as a family to kind of examine and see what the implications that you have here. So got a few questions coming through. So some of these questions are very specific, so I'll try to reach out to you guys after this. We'll just keep moving on for right now. So planning for the family farm. So a common mistake we hear all the time is I want to treat all my kids exactly the same. Trust me, I've got three small children now. I've got a 7-year-old, a 3-year-old, and an 8-month-old baby boy. So two oldest are girls and a younger son. So you know, that's great in practice, but they're not the same kid, right? So there are differences in how we treat them, and so there's a difference in fair, not necessarily meaning equal ownership among kids. So once you start talking about estate and succession planning, and you're thinking about how to best not only maximize the amount that you're able to leave to your kids without paying tax, but you're also trying to figure out how to set them up for success. What's the right answer for them? Just understand that fair doesn't necessarily mean equal ownership among kids. And part of that is just a discussion that needs to happen earlier on. If you have someone that's on the ranch, on the farm, that's actively engaged in the business, you know, typically there should be differences in how the assets they're going to get versus the off-farm kids. So another just point here: equal tenants and common ownership may, and then you'll see after that, will bolded, set the stage for a family feud. So partition actions can allow one tenant in common to trigger a court-ordered auction, so no matter how small an interest he or she owns. And so all these things are just something to take into consideration. And so, like I said just a few minutes ago, do you want the farm child to have to buy out off-farm children? So this can give them you know, skin in the game, so to speak, where there is some money that they're putting forward to kind of buy out the off-farm children. But all this goes through planning. And again, like we talked about earlier, it's all about keeping the family harmony. Sorry, I'm struggling here. So ideas and strategies on dividing it up. So direct ownership of different tracts of land to different children, which they wholly own instead of co-owning the whole as tenants in common. So it's the same, you have the same land, same assets, but the way it's titled and who actually owns what is different. And it can make a huge difference in preventing one child or surviving relative or whoever to kind of blow up the whole thing for everyone else. And so there are ways to do this, that you can still make sure that the farm, the ranch, is still preserved and is still available to be, if your intent is that it to still continue to be farmed or ranched in the future. So you can still do this if the land is owned by a limited liability entity, by including instructions to dissolve it at the death and distribute different ground to different children. So again, estate planning, wills, all this comes into play. You can add a hook on deeds subjecting the sale of land to the right of first refusal to siblings, cousins, neighbor. So whoever's going to continue farming that, they can have first rights of refusal to buy that land. So all lands or ownership in the land holding in the limited liability entity and machinery could go to a farming child, and then identify different assets for the other beneficiaries. So what does that look like? Are there sufficient assets to pull this off is the first big question, right? If all of your all the value that you have in your estate is from farm and ranch land, and the machinery, the equipment, the cattle, everything that goes into that, if that's all that there is, and you don't have these other appreciated assets to give to the off-farm kids, then that can be, you need to still keep doing some digging to figure out how you're going to do this and make it you know, not fair but equitable. And so, is there a summer lake house? Is there a winter condo? Do you have a securities account? Do you have a life insurance policy that's going to, you know, pay out? Like, what are ways that you can structure this in a way to preserve the family harmony, to allow the farm or ranch to continue to be used for that purpose, while still taking care of your kids in an equitable manner? And so, could there be life insurance benefits to provide liquidity to balance things out? So you might not want to own the life insurance yourself. And so this is where we get into an ILIT, irrevocable life insurance trust. And so we won't get into the necessarily the details here, but basically you have the insured person pays the annual premiums to the insurance trust, and the trust then buys them from the insurance company, and the premiums are paid to the insurance company. And so there is some gifting that's made every year for basically paying those insurance premiums. And so there are different ways that different entity types that can be used to get your goal accomplished. And so again, consult with your state attorney, consult with your CPA, because there's a lot of planning opportunity here. Direct ownership by children, so they may be the owners of the policy and things like that. So there are different ways to spread out the value of your estate between your heirs. So separate the land and the operation. So treat assets differently during lifetime to make them easier to pass at death. And so you might be able to survey and split off the operations from bare lands, the machinery, the equipment, the cattle, everything that goes along with that. Those are split off differently than the land. And direct who gets those assets through, maybe it's through sales during life or gifts at death. It just depends on kind of what your motivations and what the factors are in your family and your estate plan. So let me take a look through the questions again here. So Jim, I'm not familiar with Ladybird deeds myself, but I can look that up for you after this, try to get you an answer there. And John, you asked about the slides, and I think this presentation is being recorded, and I assume that we can make the slides available as well. So we'll try to get those over to you. So just kind of continuation on separating the land and the operation. So you might include the operations and share of the farm successor child either off the top, or so the farm kid gets less of other stuff. So so it might be a situation where the farm kid, the one that wants to continue farming or ranching, needs to understand that they're not going to get the condo, they're not going to get the beach house, they're not going to get the securities account, but they need to understand the value that they are receiving in this operating venture, this highly appreciated land and things like that too. So again, a lot of this goes back to communicating early and often and making sure that kids are involved in these discussions. I can think of another situation where we had a client group, mom and dad owned the operating business, and then they were transitioning it to the sons, but they wanted the sons to have skin in the game, so to speak. So they did a part gift, part sale to the sons. And there was a third son not involved in the operation, and so they got different assets, but they did a really good job of coming together as a family unit, discussing what the goals were, and everyone was on board with kind of what was going to happen and where everything was going. And the son that was not involved in the operating business, he was good with what he was getting because he had no interest in the operating business, and vice versa. So again, just communicating there. Offer operations for sale to a non-related successor. So maybe you don't have one of the kids that's interested in continuing the operating business, but you have a non-related successor, someone that's been with you, for many, many years, that has a passion around your ranch or your farm and really is interested in carrying on that legacy. Maybe there's some sort of opportunity there to offering that to sell to them, and then the family group, the heirs, get the cash involved to kind of to go do with what they will. You might hold the land in a trust to be available to a farm successor until retirement, and then distribute it to grandchildren. So that's kind of the scenario I was talking about with my colleague over in our Dallas office. Or have the land in an entity, which all kids inherit with rules attached, keeping the land available to the successor. So maybe all of your land is in some sort of entity. The kids get an interest in the entity itself and not the land itself. And so if they want to get out, so to speak, then the other kids have the opportunity to buy their interest out. And you could set all sorts of terms and kind of pricing and all that sort of stuff in these documents ahead of time. Some land holding entity ideas, because again, like we talked about earlier, like the values in the land is where a lot of estate value is coming, especially in the agribusiness side of things. And that's why some of these proposals that we had before us this past year were going to be so burdensome to anyone in agriculture, because the land is such a highly appreciated asset. And if you're going to trigger some sort of tax just because it's transferred to the spouse, or it's transferred to kids or whatever, and for the idea of them to come up and pay the taxes would be almost impossible to continue the operation. So the entity should be structured with voting and non-voting interest. And so this is a great bullet point here, just to understand that when you have an entity, you can structure that in a way that kids could have an interest in the entity and be able to participate in the income from that entity, but they may not have voting shares, or their voting shares might not have as many voting shares as mom and dad do, or whatever the case may be. So that could also be the case for the heirs, the children, or whoever inherits the land. The farming heirs could have more voting interest in the operations of the business. So lifetime gifting or coordinated estate plan provides control of land to farming successor through voting interest. And so again, this is where you have the lifetime gifting versus leaving upon death, but there could be a reason that you would want to do it during life. Off-farm heirs can receive non-voting interest, and the holding of the voting interest controls the entity unless you provide otherwise. So again, this is all done through detailed planning, detailed discussions with an estate attorney to get all this set up properly, so that everything is known ahead of time. And obviously there's going to be surprises like anything in life, but we can plan the best we can and at least do something. That way it's not left up for debate in the future. So that's a whole point here. Decision making in the land holding entity. So you could include specific details. Must the land be offered to lease to a certain tenant? If so, what are the terms? Can the interest be owned by non-blood relatives? I don't know, maybe that's something that's important to you to keep that in the family, or maybe there are certain people that are not blood relatives that you're would be okay and open to those being included in that. If buyback happens because of a default, do good owners get to pay bad owners a discounted price? So, if there's certain things that happen, can you structure it in a way that the farming heirs, the ones that are wanting to continue that, what does the price look like? Can the non-farm heirs, can they command a price that's so exorbitant and ridiculous that there's no way the farming operation could continue and it would have to be sold? So you're just trying to think through every scenario, or as many scenarios as you can, when you kind of start to structure these deals. I think we're doing okay on time here, so we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. Non-voting owners need to be excluded from all management. So, it seems pretty obvious, but sometimes when you're setting these partnership agreements and these operating agreements, just the language is important. And that's why a good quality attorney is so viable here and valuable here, because you just need to make sure that your I's are crossed, I's are dotted, your T's are crossed. Define big decisions that may require majority, supermajority, or unanimous approval of all non-voting interests, so everyone feels involved. So, it's one of those things where you don't want the folks that don't have voting interests or have limited voting interests to feel like they have no say-so on the direction of the entity. They should still have some skin in the game, so to speak, so that they can feel valued and that their voice is going to be heard too on any of these big decisions. Some examples of those big decisions could be, are you going to sell the land? If you're going to take a mortgage out on the land, are you going to drastically change the use of the land? So kind of example there is like a wind farm or a solar farm, right? That's going to drastically change the use of the land. So, should those types of big decisions come to a majority or supermajority vote? Setting cash rate rents if one owner is a tenant. So you also want to make sure that, that the person farming the land isn't able to set some exorbitant low rent rates to to basically to not be fair market value, but you also don't want them to be exorbitant either. So there's all kinds of ways in structuring these agreements that in a way that's helpful and productive for everyone involved. And, you know, there's a number of hot button issues we could get into here, whether it be wind farms, solar farms, you know, easements, all kinds of stuff that comes into play here. Like we talked about early on, it's really important to dust this off every 5 years or so. So plan for now based on today's circumstances, and where we are now is we have a $12.06 million exemption per spouse. So a total of $24 million. What do we know that's coming down the pipe? We know that it's set to sunset in 2026. That is known. What could happen between now and then or after that, we have no idea. But what we can do is plan for now and kind of reassess in 5 years or 3 to 5 years or whatever your family views as appropriate amount of time. The original plan should obviously allow as much flexibility as possible. There's some things that can be undone, and there's some things that when they're done, they're final, right? And so we want to preserve as much flexibility as possible. And so just like right now, it seems like there's a huge opportunity in getting as much out of the estate as possible, since we're thinking the exemption is going to basically be cut in half. But that could go the other way too. And so just understand that flexibility is a huge benefit to planning in the future. But and then finally, review when there's changes in laws or change in circumstances and adjust as necessary. So life happens to all of us. We like to think that we're in control many times, but so much of the time there's so many things that are beyond our control. And so we can plan, we can reset our plan, but understand that things change, and we should be willing to and able to adjust as necessary. And finally, you know, there's no one size fits all solution. Like I said, my fastball is income tax, and just like an income tax, there's no one size fits all. Each operation is different. Each family dynamic is different. And so don't look at your neighbors or your friends or the way your parents did it or whatever the situation might be and think that that's what your plan needs to look like, because that's just obviously probably not the case. Look at your family as your family and figure out what is the right solution for you and your family, and how do you transition into the future through succession planning, estate planning, you know, reducing tax liabilities as much as we can, and those sorts of things. So I think Tyler, I think hit it pretty good. So we were wanting to end of 12:45, so a few minutes early, but happy to answer questions as best I can. This is obviously a little bit more challenging. I'd love to be in person with all of you guys, so you could just, you know, holler them up at me and then try to work through those, because some of these are very lengthy and very specific. So I'll read through here and see if there's anything that we can answer here. But like I said, if there's something that's very specific to your situation, I'll definitely try to reach out to you and set some time up to talk with you too. But John, I don't know if you've seen anything in here that you've seen, but I'm going to read through here again to see what I can help with here.
I will just say, if you are interested in the slide deck, feel free to send me an email and I will get it to you. I cannot see everyone's email on a list on my end, so I can't just send it to everyone. But my email is tschuster@tscra.org, and I would be happy to get those from Brant and then get them to y'all.
So I see one question in here. Individual says, you know, has some stepchildren involved. So there's currently everything's 50-50 between the spouse, but then you have stepchildren that come into play. And it is as this person put it, a touchy subject. And so there are so many family dynamics that work into this. And it's so hard to give an answer to you specifically on kind of what the right answer is. I think it starts with understanding that's a touchy subject with you and your spouse and your family, and just at least starting to address that, I think is where a good place to start would be. Because like we just said on the previous slide, there's no one size fits all. But happy to talk with you more offline, and we can kind of maybe dive into this a little bit more. But it's a very, very lengthy question there, so sorry to not be very specific there. So but again, I'm happy to answer questions. I've got here's my contact info. So you can reach out to me too. I'm happy to share the slide deck with you and kind of talk through anything else that I can help with. There's a lot of planning involved in this, and a lot of really good people that we have at our disposal here at the firm. Like I said, I don't know if any of you know Paul Neefer. He seems to be kind of a little bit of a celebrity. He has a blog that he does, and very, very well known in this area. And so if there's anything we can help with, we'd love to talk to you guys and see how we might help. So someone said, if a spouse died less than 2 years ago but was unaware of the 706 portability form, can it still be applied for? The answer is yes. If less than 2 years, there's still opportunity to file that 706. And if it's beyond the original due date of 9 months plus 6 months, so you're kind of in that window from the default to the max 2 years, I think there are some maybe some additional hoops that you have to jump through in that, but yes, I think you're good to still be able to elect for the portability and file that first to die spouse's 706. Good question. This person said, who is the guru at your firm for estate planning? So it's a team approach. I think I would say, I try not to say anybody is the predominant expert in an area, because there's always factors at play there. But we have a group within CLA. I would say Paul is somebody that I always reach out to and bring him in situations and discussions with clients, because I think the main thing is understanding that you should have a team around you. And I think it's one thing to have a CPA that maybe dabbles in everything, but understanding when to bring someone else into the discussion, I think is a really important part there. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to. I don't know what I just did there. I don't see any other questions coming through, Tyler. Oh, here's another one. If second spouse passes away, 706 still applicable? And so again, it depends. If the first spouse died, there was no estate income tax return filed, and then when the second spouse dies, it kind of goes back to do you have a taxable estate or not? And if so, I think that's the biggest discussion, is whether there's a taxable estate. Because if there's no taxable estate, then there's no filing requirement that you need to have on the death of the second spouse. This person said, is there an advantage of moving a portion of the assets to an LLC for transition to heirs? And so I would say, yeah, there definitely can be, using some sort of limited liability entity, depending on the state. There's the types of entities can come into play, but definitely there can be an advantage of having some sort of entity in place that the heirs own an interest in the entity, and the entity owns the assets. And so there definitely can be some opportunity there from a structuring perspective of making things easier upon a spouse passing. And we didn't really get into it here, but there's trusts that come into play too. So trust entities, all those things are tools in the tool belt, so to speak. But again, I think I've said it enough, but get an estate planning attorney. And I hope to be able to bring an estate planning attorney into this discussion with me today, but just with the deadline for me, and it kind of time got away from me, but I'd love to do another one of these in the future with an estate attorney, because I think they're so vital to this, and making sure that you have the right entities, the right trusts, and all the right setup there from a legal perspective to make sure that your intent is what's going to happen. Is there an income tax disadvantage? I'm not sure what the question you mean there. So if you can give me a little bit more detail on your question. And I guess the only income tax, if it's related to the previous question, if there's the only income tax disadvantage was, I guess, now you have an entity tax return that needs to be filed on an annual basis, and the owners of that entity, depending on how the ownership is structured, would then get income allocated to them based on their ownership percentages or membership units or whatever the case may be. But I can't think of a disadvantage other than another return to file and keep track of, and understanding how the income is going to be allocated to the owners of that entity.
It looks like there's one in the chat, and it's, can a conservation easement prevent division and sale by the next generation?
Let me pull that up. I didn't know there was a chat too, so my bad, Tyler. I wasn't looking at that. I'm going to default to my I don't know answer on that one. So I think that's probably maybe something that I should know. I don't know if I should know or not, but I don't know that answer specifically there. So I can definitely help find out the answer on that there. Thanks, Pete. So Pete said, don't forget mineral interests and valuations and the visions may not be top of mind to some people, for sure. Yeah. So, you're not just talking about the surface rights to the land. You're also talking about mineral interests, and those interests can have a huge implication on kind of the value of that land too. So all of this goes into the play when you're thinking about the estate, and not just the surface land. But that's a great point.
So someone just asked for my email. It's tschuster@tscra.org. I can resend it in the chat, or you can send an email to education@tscra.org. I will see both and I will answer them. I'll be sure to get the slides and get them to those of you who've asked for them. It looks like we've answered all the questions that have been sent, but if you do have a question we didn't answer, please feel free to email us. All of you will get an email in 48 hours that will give you the link to rewatch this. And so we would be happy to send you that as well if you don't get that within 48 hours. But thank you so much for joining us, Brant, and we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it. Thank you guys for your time and questions, and hopefully I didn't put you to sleep too much.